It was the kind of morning that seemed to freeze time. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft glow over the town. The birds outside chirped in rhythm with the soft hum of my thoughts. I sat by the kitchen table, sipping my coffee, unaware that the day ahead would change everything I knew about my life. I had been married to Jason for 5 years. We were young, both of us full of hope, dreams, and ambitions. Our love had been the kind that everyone talked about, the kind that made people believe in fairy tales. We lived in a cozy house with a white picket fence, and I was convinced we had everything, until the truth knocked on my door. The day started like any other. Jason kissed me goodbye, as he always did, promising he'd be home by dinner. But something felt off that morning. A strange heaviness lingered in the air. I couldn't put my finger on it, but it was there. As the day unfolded, I found myself thinking about it more and more. Then, as if the universe was conspiring against me, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. I hesitated but opened it, and what I read made my heart stop. I know about her. Please don't let him hurt you any more than he already has. He's married to both of us. I'm the other wife. I blinked at the message in disbelief. It didn't make sense. Jason? Married to someone else? I had to know more. My hands were shaking as I typed a reply. Who are you? The response came quickly. Her name is Clara. I've been with him for 2 years, and he's promised me that he loves me. The world around me seemed to blur, and the only thing that was clear was the sting in my chest. It was like I had been hit by a wave, crashing into me with force I couldn't handle. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. I tried to convince myself it was a lie. I had to. But the more I thought about it, the more I remembered the little things. The late nights Jason would come home, the phone calls he always took in private, his sudden trips that seemed to have no real reason. All of it was starting to make sense in a way I couldn't ignore. I confronted Jason that evening. When he walked through the door, I was sitting on the couch, my heart pounding in my chest. His face was filled with that familiar warmth, the smile that always made me feel safe. But tonight, it felt like a mask. Is it true? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Jason froze, his eyes darting toward the door like he was looking for an escape. What do you mean, babe? His words were smooth, but I could see the flicker of fear in his eyes. Is it true that you have another wife? I asked again, more firmly this time. Jason's face went pale. He sat down next to me, but the distance between us felt like miles. I didn't want you to find out like this, he said, his voice barely audible. I never wanted to hurt you. Tears filled my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. How could you do this to me? I whispered, feeling the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. He took my hand, but I pulled away. I didn't mean for it to happen, he continued. It started when I met Clara. She was different, and I was confused. I thought I could keep everything separate, but I couldn't. I love both of you in different ways. I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted it to be like this. His words didn't make sense to me. How could love be divided into two? How could he think that living two lives was okay? As I sat there, my mind raced with a million thoughts. Was this the man I had married? Was this the life I had built? A part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers, to make him feel the pain I was feeling. But another part of me, the part that still loved him, wanted to believe that maybe there was a way out, a way to fix things. But I knew deep down this was not something that could be fixed. I asked him to leave. I needed time. I needed space. My heart ached with every breath I took, but I knew that I couldn't live a life built on lies. I couldn't stay with someone who had betrayed my trust so deeply. As Jason left that night, I sat in the silence of our home, wondering how I had gotten to this point. I had thought I knew everything about my husband, but now it felt like I didn't know him at all. Days passed, and the reality of my situation sank in. I spoke to Clara. She was kind, but there was an underlying sadness in her voice. She had believed in Jason just as much as I had. She, too, had been a victim of his promises and lies. We both cried on the phone together, two women united by the same man, broken by the same betrayal. It wasn't easy, but eventually I found the strength to move on. I realized that I deserved more than a life filled with lies. I deserved honesty, respect, and love that was not divided between two people. And I knew, deep inside, that I was better off without him. Jason tried to reach out to me, but I never answered. He had made his choice, and so had I. Years passed, and I learned to rebuild my life. I found strength in the things I had once feared. I built a new world for myself, one where I was in control. I focused on my career, my friends, and most importantly, my own happiness. And while Jason and Clara were still a part of my past, I learned that life goes on. Sometimes, the hardest lessons are the ones that lead us to the best versions of ourselves. Learn that love can be complicated, but trust is simple. Once broken, it's hard to repair. And most of all, I learned that I deserve to be loved wholeheartedly, without secrets, without lies, and without betrayal. The unspoken promise. The rain poured down in torrents as I sat in my car, staring at the large, imposing house through the foggy windows. I had driven for hours, but now that I was here, I wasn't sure I was ready to step out. The streetlights cast long shadows across the wet pavement, and the sound of the rain on the roof was a constant reminder of the storm outside. But it was nothing compared to the storm brewing in my heart. It had been 3 years since I had last seen him. 3 years since everything had changed. And now, here I was, back in the town I had left behind, ready to face the man who had been my whole world. His name was Alex, and he had been my first love. Our story had been one of passion, joy, and promises that we thought would last forever. We had grown up together, shared our dreams, and believed that nothing could ever come between us. But life, as it often does, had other plans. I remembered the day he left as if it were yesterday. He had stood in front of me, his eyes filled with guilt and regret. "I'm sorry," he had said, his voice breaking. "I can't do this anymore. I can't be the person you need me to be." I had begged him to stay, but he had walked away, leaving me in a sea of unanswered questions. Why? What happened? Was it something I did? Was it something I could have fixed? But no answers came, only silence. And that silence haunted me for years. Now, as I sat in my car, the silence of those years felt louder than ever. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, but the weight of everything was still too much for me to bear. I took a deep breath, wiped away the tears that had started to form, and stepped out of the car. My shoes splashed in the puddles as I made my way to the front door. I hesitated for a moment before ringing the bell, my heart racing. The door opened slowly, and there he was, Alex. He looked older, different somehow. His hair was shorter, and there were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. But his eyes, those familiar, soulful eyes, were the same. And in that moment, I realized that no matter how much time had passed, I still loved him. "Emily," he whispered, his voice barely audible. I nodded, unable to find the words. What was I supposed to say after all this time, after everything that had happened? He stepped aside, silently inviting me in. I walked into the house, feeling like a stranger in a place that had once been my home. The walls were the same, the furniture unchanged, but it felt different, cold, distant, as if the years between us had turned it into a memory rather than a living space. We sat in the living room, the silence stretching between us like a chasm. Finally, Alex spoke. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," he began, his voice shaking. "But I need to explain. I owe you that much." I looked at him, my heart aching. "You don't owe me anything, Alex. You left without a word. You broke my heart. You ruined everything we had." He nodded, his eyes full of regret. "I know. I was selfish. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. I thought that if I left, you would find someone better. Someone who could give you everything I couldn't." I shook my head, my chest tight. "You could have told me. You could have at least given me a chance to understand, to fight for us." "I didn't think I deserved you," he whispered. "I was broken, Emily. I didn't know how to fix myself, and I thought I was holding you back. But every day since I left, I've regretted it. Every day I've wanted to come back, to fix things. But I knew I couldn't. I was scared." "Scared?" I repeated, my voice trembling. "Scared of what, Alex? Of loving me? Of letting me in? You left me with nothing but questions and pain." "I was scared of failing you," he admitted, his voice breaking. "I was scared that I couldn't be the man you deserved. I was scared of not being enough." For a moment, I was silent. His words hung in the air, and I could feel the weight of them, pressing down on me. I had lived with this pain for so long, but hearing him speak, hearing the regret in his voice, made me realize something. Maybe it wasn't just him who had failed. Maybe I had failed too. I had spent all these years holding on to the past, to the memory of a love that was no longer there. I had built walls around myself, convinced that I was never going to love again, that I would never trust anyone with my heart. But in that moment I saw that I had been living in the shadow of the past, unable to move forward. I took a deep breath and looked at him. You can't change the past, Alex. We can't change what happened. But we can choose how we move forward. He nodded, his eyes filled with hope. I know. I want to be with you again. I want to make things right. I looked away for a moment, considering his words. I wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive him. I wasn't sure if I could forget the pain, the heartache, and the years of loneliness. But I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't let the past control me any longer. I don't know if I can ever forgive you, I said, my voice quiet. But I can't keep living in the past. I need to let go of the hurt. Alex's eyes softened, and he reached out, taking my hand in his. I'll do whatever it takes, Emily. Whatever it takes to make you believe in us again. I looked at him, feeling a mixture of fear and hope. Could we rebuild what we once had? Or was it too late? The answer, I realized, wasn't in the past. It was in the present. And in that moment, I made a decision. I wasn't going to let fear dictate my future. We didn't have all the answers. We didn't know what would happen next. But we had one thing, the willingness to try again, and that in itself was enough. As I left his house that evening, I felt a strange sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to face it. The unspoken promise between us had been broken once, but maybe, just maybe, it could be rebuilt, slowly, carefully, with trust and patience. And with that thought, I walked out into the rain, knowing that the journey ahead would be difficult, but it would be one worth taking.